Can I do sound test?
I can hear you all right, Abid. Hi. Let me tell them.
That's all right. Don't
Yeah,
worry. Thank you, Heather.
no problem. Yeah, so he's online. He'd like to do a sound check. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Check. Hello. Hello. Check. Are you audible? You're audible, sir?
Can you speak again?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear very well. Thank you.
Hello.
So,
Hello. 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 Hello.
yeah,
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
they can hear you, Abid. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the technical session 3 on housing, built environment, and new construction technologies to promote urban resilience. As India continues to urbanize, housing remains one of the most important determinants of quality of life, economic opportunities, and social well being. At the same time, cities are increasingly facing the impacts of climate change, growing infrastructure pressures, rising housing costs, and persistent vulnerabilities in informal settlements. Hence, building resilient housing becomes very important and becomes more of an important task rather than just creating additional housing stock. Today's discussion will explore how these integrated approaches to strengthen affordability, improve access to services, and promoting climate responsive planning can help shape more resilient homes, neighborhoods, and cities. Um, Allow me to introduce our panelists and moderator for today. We are joined today by an eminent panel representing policy, finance, research, technology, community development, and sustainable construction. To guide us through this important conversation, I am honored to invite the chair and moderator for this session, Shri Kuldeep Narayan, Joint Secretary Housing, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, who also overlooks the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs' flagship program Housing for All and PM Awas Yojana Urban. So I request you to kindly join on stage. Our first speaker for today is Shri Sanjay Seth, Senior Director, Sustainable Infrastructure Program at TERI. With over 4 decades of experience in energy and infrastructure sectors, he has been advancing sustainable habitats, green buildings, and low-carbon urban development. And he's also the Vice President and CEO of the Griha Council, India's green building rating system. Our next speaker for today is Shri C.N. Jha, Deputy Chief, Standardization and Product Development at the Building Materials and Technology Promotion Council. With more than 26 years of experience, he has played a key role in promoting innovative, cost-effective, and disaster-resilient construction technologies. Our next speaker is Srimati Bijal Brahmabhat, Director, Mahila Housing Trust. Her work lies at the intersection of housing, climate resilience, women's empowerment, and community development. I now invite Shri Vishal Goyal, General Manager, National Housing Bank. Mr. Goyal has more than 30 years of experience at the NHB and currently heads the Government's Schemes Department and Market Research Consultancy and Policy Department at NHB. Joining us virtually, we are also joined by Shri Krishna Chaitanya K, CEO of Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Fund Management Corporation, an infrastructure investment and project finance professional with over 2 decades of experience. Joining us virtually is Mr. Abdul Razak Khalil, Practice Manager for Urban Resilience and Land Group for South Asia at the World Bank. With experience across multiple regions and sectors, he brings expertise in urban development, resilience, and land management. And finally, we have Dr. Debarpita Roy, lead research at the Center for Policy on Housing and Habitat at the NIUA. An economist by training, Dr. Roy has over 17 years of experience in academia, policy research, and practice. A warm welcome to all our speakers, and thank you for joining us today. I request Kuldeep sir to kindly deliver his context setting and moderate the session. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope I am audible. Okay. Our guest on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, what we are going to discuss today, although the topic is housing and built environment resilience, but it is to be seen in a different context, in the broader spectrum about our urban resilience in India, building sustainable and future-ready cities. When you see both the topics and then think about the panel that we have today, I welcome all the panelists here. So you should be surprised why when we are talking about resilience, then why people working in housing from financial side, social side, policy side should be talking about resilience. Isn't resilience about how do we get up and recover from shocks? Unfortunately, urban resilience, when we talk about, we always think about typhoon, cyclones, flood, actually environmental resilience. But when we are discussing urban resilience and housing resilience, this is where I would like to make this thing very clear to the audience that we are talking about ability of the city, ability of the citizens to sustain, to absorb and to recover from shocks, whether those are environmental or more importantly, if those are social, those could be economic or financial. Something changes in the society, something changes in the economy, some economic external or internal shock, then how does our society react? Availability of housing and accessibility of housing, does it remain resilient or not? It is also part of housing resilience. Then the second aspect, whether that resilience is available to the whole city, whether everyone who is part of our city is having equal capability or equal resilience, that if something happens, then can he or she recover from the shock and maintain the housing accessibility. You can think about Gini coefficient, you can think about the inequality in the society, but not everyone is having the same paying capacity or same capacity or disposable income, so that if there is any variation in income, variation in the situation of a person, then he or she may not be having same kind of resilience if economic factors come. Then when we talk about environmental resilience, it is always said that whenever there is a shock, whenever there is a disaster, it hits the most who are the most vulnerable as well in the society. So how do we react, how do we get ahead from such shocks, even if it is environmental resilience? So in today's session, we'll be actually talking about how as a society we develop such systems where everyone has accessible housing, where the city and the society has resilience that whatever may come, people's ability to acquire housing, be it owned or rental, remains there. And whenever there is a issue, whenever there is a disaster, whenever there is a change in society, even then it as a whole we recover fast. In this context, this is why today we'll be discussing the whole spectrum, be it own housing or be it rental housing. We'll be discussing particularly EWS, LIG housing availability as well as ability to acquire and shift in the new environment. We'll also think about how the system can be resilient. That means that those who are constructing the housing, be it rental or owned one, they have sufficient project financing available through redundant sources, not necessarily a single source or a single mode of financing. Then those who have to acquire and those who have to take loan, they retain the capacity to acquire loans and also capacity to repay. What are we doing and what should be doing our banks, financial institutions, and to prepare our society and prepares most vulnerable sections of our society, our cities, for these kind of challenges and how to meet them. And then the most obvious one, how do our buildings and built environment sustain the environmental shocks? So that is the kind of bandwidth and spectrum on which we'll be talking about today. So we'll be covering urban resilience, housing resilience, and social, economic, and environmental aspects of this housing resilience. In this context, let me invite one by one. And to begin with, I'll be inviting Sanjay Seth ji, because today climate responsive housing design has become increasingly important in our cities. But confronting rising temperatures, heat islands effects, which has nothing to do with any external environmental factors, it is pure city specific, extreme rainfall patterns that we are observing. We are likely to see extreme on both sides rainfall pattern this year also and probably next year also. Extreme frequencies of or increasing frequencies of such once in a century, once in a 50-year events of cyclones, rainfall and heating. In these contexts, what can we do and what are we doing for thermal comfort as well as ensuring that our cities and our built environments are resilient, they come out of the shocks easily. Sanjay ji.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me congratulate NIUA on completion of 50 years and for the wonderful work that they are doing, and also compliments to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs for really taking this initiative forward. I think the Joint Secretary Housing in his initial remarks very aptly said one thing, that when climate change or climate impacts happen, they're very disproportionately they get impacted. And the economically weaker sections of the people, they are the most vulnerable, they are the most impacted set of people who are not in a state of building up that resilience to come back, So the issue is that we always start looking at the problem after it has occurred, and we do not look at it at the initial stages when we are putting together elements, whether it is at the city level or at the housing level. How do we make sure that the designs that we create for them are able to withstand the changing climatic patterns, the rainfall, the cyclonic activities, earthquake. So there are a whole lot of things which can be thought of well in a low cost, no cost. That's very important, because the vulnerable communities, they do not have access to funding or monies which are available to them freely for going about doing their corrections, if I may say. So the point is that passive design strategies which do not add a cost when you are putting together these housing, I'm going to limit myself to the housing sector. When we talk of a housing, we say that why do people live out of housing? Even if you look at the Housing for All program, the government's initiative is to provide a house to each and every member of the society, every citizen of the country, because it ensures safety and comfort. Now, if these two elements go missing, then that house does not remain a house to be really living out of. And whether it is a rich man or a poor man, everybody wants comfort levels. The rich man can afford probably comforts through mechanical forms of cooling, because he has accessible to unlimited resources of funds and all of that. But the poor person has to rely on that fan which is really going to provide that comfort level to him. And I think that's the biggest thing that we do, that while we provide the housing to all the vulnerable or to the economically weaker sections, or bridge that gap which is currently missing, we must ensure that the designs of these houses are such that they eventually are able to bring about that level of comfort which is going to be delivered by using a fan for his basic needs. That's one. Secondly, the good part is that we are still trying to provide that housing. We have not provided it to all. It is much easier for us to do it at the time when the designs or when these housing are being built, rather than going on a retrofit model, because there the window of opportunity becomes very less. You can only do certain things which will probably also be slightly cost, there will be cost sensitivities around it. But if you were able to do it at the design stages, then I think we would be well within the fact that sustainability or resilience and all of that, people when they say that green costs more or something, it's not true at all. So it brings down not only the initial costs of putting together these houses, but also eventually when they operate, they don't pinch the pockets of the people who are living out of those houses. So I think context-specific design solutions are very important. It should not be treated as an additional feature that these will be, it should not be seen as a premium offering, if I may use the word, and they should become an essential component of the housing quality and resilience. So this, I think, is very important. And when I talk of passive design strategies, it should have, normal things which we probably in our country have witnessed this, at least for the person like, I mean, I have now got about 40 years of experience. I have lived through different eras, and we have grown up in times when probably the things that we are looking at today or talking about today, they were never discussed in the past. Chajjas and shading devices, all of these things were an integral part of our design processes. But gradually, as architecture has become more and more modern, we have done away with the traditional practices which were essential to provide the level of comforts. The ceiling heights were very high. We had ventilators on top with the simple principles that warm air will rise and go out of the ventilators, and the courtyard, the cool air would come in from there, and I think the comfort levels would be very good. But we have now started moving into an era where we are looking at mechanical solutions for providing all of these things. So I think these need to be, and I'm not saying that we don't need to move ahead with times, we should, but the basic principles that were followed during that time, they should become the underlying, the foundation for the design strategies that we do. Simple things like wall to window ratio, the sun path diagram, all of these things, I think when we are putting these designs, it becomes very important. Another very important thing which I obviously, I always say, sir, is that our Honorable Prime Minister has very nicely said all of these things, that vocal for local. You see that local building materials, you don't need to go about looking for building materials which have to be fetched from far away distances. Whatever is locally available and it is to be used, I think those become very important. Improving indoor comfort levels, reducing dependence on mechanical cooling systems, which I said already, that becomes very important. And then, of course, these through, and we know we are in a tropical country, cooling has always been something which is going to be increasing as we keep urbanizing, as we put more and more buildings. We will see this increasing by the day. So how do we really make sure that our designs don't, kind of push us towards adopting mechanical systems for taking these things? So I think I would like to just, in conclusion, like to say that it is, when we talk of sustainable development, I think it is a balancing act of social equity, economic prosperity, and environmental stewardship. Climate responsive design should no longer be regarded as a specialized concept, but it should become a standard practice in every housing project that we take up. So with that, I think I'd just like to stop here. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Serji. Very rightly you put across the point of design for resilience, and vulnerability is something which requires equity while dealing with vulnerable population in the city. And also how we can be vocal for local, have local materials, local design principles, which were earlier assumed to be obvious, now we have to rediscover for ourselves. I'll be talking to you in next round maybe how green building frameworks like Griha and Eco-NIUA Sanhita, etc., that and sustainable materials can be used in our affordable housing construction, retaining that resilience and affordability together. But in the first round, let me come to Bijal ji. You have been working quite a lot on helping the community to set in a new livable environment. You have seen social and economic factors operating when there is a either redevelopment or resettlement or even in situ slum upgradation happening. And you have seen how vulnerable low income families grapple with these issues more than anyone else. So in your view, how do how do various kinds of economic factors and risk impact the housing outcomes, and how does the housing choices impact the resilience, and what can be the policy, governance and administrative interventions that you have seen work on ground and what we can learn from them?
Thank you, sir. And congratulations to the NIUA on its 50th anniversary. So I come from the Mahila Housing Trust, and we have been working with the poor women in informal sector on habitat issues, urban development and climate resilience. And we are a partner to many of the city governments across largely 3 states, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand and Gujarat. But I would say that the work in Gujarat so far as housing for the economically weaker section is concerned has been very exemplary. And we have partnered with government, but we also support development of informal settlements which have not been covered under the program. And through that I have learned 3-4 things. One, I think housing is the first line of resilience protection. So if communities have housing which get flooded, which do not have thermal comfort and are very hot, and if they have insecure tenure, you cannot talk of resilience, whether it is social or economic. We have seen and we have surveyed that a lot of these communities, of course home-based workers, currently about 40 million in the country, and others who are vendors also use their house as a storehouse and go down. They don't have a separate go down. So vegetable vendors will sell the vegetable and bring the vegetables back to the house. And so if you have a house which gets flooded, your goods get destroyed, your assets, economic assets are destroyed. So I think 4 tenets. And we've also seen that, houses which we have, undertaken a lot of studies, and on an average we have found that almost 23% of the income of people or women having annual income of 120,000, which is almost 1,20,000 annual income, 23% of their income gets destroyed in heat and in flooding, primarily because it's loss of goods, it's also loss of customer footfall during this season, it's also not having cooling mechanisms, not having just the resilience to be able to protect yourself. Loss of productivity too. So you lose 1/3 productive hour because of heat or transport. You cannot go to your place of work because the roads are not accessible, because of the flooding. So I think 4 tenets. I think space in the informal housing or the low income housing is a big issue, and all the architects are going to kill me, but over a period of time I have seen 30% surplus land which was used for stairs, etc., now being brought to almost 40-45%. So in a low-income housing, the 45% open, super built-up land actually falls either on the government or on the poor. And a lot of public space. I mean, there is a well-intentioned, good public space given in Housing for All mission, but very huge public spaces which are left undesigned actually then become the dens. And then you are compromising on the private space. So I think we need a balance, these private spaces which give privacy, dignity, and also are being used for work. So I think somewhere a balance between the super built up area and the actual private space that people get. I think tenure is extremely important. Access to basic infrastructure, everyone knows at the household level. You know, if you don't have it, it's a question of dignity, it's a question of productivity. We have seen so much violence happening because of not having access to water and so many litigations. And of course, material tech and design. I do feel on the policy and on the governance issues that, sir, you mentioned, I do feel that, you know, all policies in India are actually very well intentioned and very well designed, but the devil lies in the implementation mechanisms, the way they are interpreted at the local level. And I would say we have been doing very well, extremely well, although 3 states we have been working, but with the government of Gujarat. Firstly, because I think there was a land made available, at least for the Housing for All mission program, because there was the way the land is being planned in the state. We have town planning schemes. Secondly, the existing data was already made available in terms of TP schemes and existing slums, etc., from the slum-free city action plans that were made, and that was institutionalized. I mean, government has a lot of data, but then as the officer changes, the data gets lost and they don't really use it later on, but this was very well used. I think the third thing was partnerships were developed. So it has a history of partnership with both the NGO sector and the developers also. So I think we have a tripartite partnership where the developers are there, the government is there, and the NGO is also officially hired, both by the government and in cases where it is so, we really do get paid by the government, but by the municipal corporations for performing certain services. And so, because of this tripartite strong history and partnership, first thing was that when the policy was brought to fruition, the first principle was, I think, the principle of inclusion. So we said we have to include everyone, and while the eligibility parameters were there, how do you include? Because if you ensure that no one who is eligible gets excluded, then you are making sure that there will be no litigations in a housing scheme. And the developers, and especially when you refer to vertical housing scheme, are really, really afraid of litigations, because then they are sure they will not see any profits because of going to court. So I think we brought in a lot of flexibility for the eligibility criteria, which was really at the implementation level. For example, children who were above 18 and they wanted a separate house got included, not for free, for a certain payment, because free house was only one, but for a certain payment, for example. So there was, and then people who did not have any eligibility proofs, for example, we set up a Panchnama system till a very long time. Of course, now it has stopped existing, but there was a Panchnama system for a very long time. So I think how do you really don't exclude? And there were regular meetings which were set up between the administration, the NGO, and the developer, where we really had a voice. I think social audits have been very strongly undertaken. I know because we were also given social audits by the government of Gujarat, not only in the schemes where we were direct partners, but for other beneficiary-led construction schemes, etc. And a lot of our suggestions have been incorporated by the state and then moved to the national level. And I think we started this, actually the ISSR housing way back in 2010 when Modi ji was the chief minister there. And so this was pre the Housing for All mission era. And from there on, we have been implementing it and seeing the loopholes and trying to make it better and giving the feedback. And the government has willingly taken up the feedbacks to the extent possible. So I think the policy has now been revised thrice since when it was set up in 2010. So I think these have been the broad principles, the reason why it has become very successful across Gujarat.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijalji. I'll have to check whether Abdul Razak, are you online? Then we'll, yeah.
Yes, yes.
You are there. So
Yes.
why I wanted you to come in at this juncture, that we are talking about housing, what are social factors we discussed, how environmental resilience is important and most vulnerable are most affected by it. But there is another aspect to it, that housing adequacy is not saved only by the quality of dwelling unit. Resilience is not saved only by the quality of dwelling unit, but also the accessibility to other residential environment and their connection to other urban systems. Like our housing is as good as its connection to public transport, to the urban services, that is water, sanitation, and connectivity to the places where a family wants to go. Maybe employment centers, maybe hospitals, maybe educational centers. So, given your experience of working in India and South Asia, how do you see, what are the challenges that we encounter in projects, not only in terms of construction of housing and laying the infrastructure, but also ensuring its last mile connectivity, so as it is available to houses those people who live in the cities, and also seeing our high peri-urban growth, which is causing a lot of pressure on urban infrastructure. What can be the principles that can be used for redevelopment and ensuring that we have open spaces, maybe high density, but also what Bijalji said, balance between private space and the public space. How do we ensure that more and more people can be accommodated in our urban core without going into the peri-urban sites? So your experiences and what is your take on the policies that are shaping our housing resilience?
Brilliant. Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Narayan, and thank you, Dr. Kondo, for the invitation. First, congratulations to NIUA on their 50 years of shaping India's urban journey. 50 years ago, India was barely urban. Today, it's exhibiting one of the largest urban transformation of any country. Institutions like NIUA have helped shape that journey, and it's a privilege to be part of this conversation. Let me start with one simple argument. If I had one intervention to make Indian city more resilient, I would really start with housing, because housing is where resilience becomes real for ordinary people. Think about it. Housing is probably the longest lasting asset that we build in our cities. A road can be widened, a drainage system can be upgraded, a power system can be modernized. But when we build a house in the wrong place, with the wrong design, or the wrong material, we lock ourselves for decades. And the consequences are felt every single day by the families who dwell in this house. So as India gets hotter, for example, the house itself becomes the first line of defense. For millions of families, especially lower income households, the building is the cooling system. They don't have the luxury of turning up the air condition. And that's why I increasingly see housing not simply as a shelter issue, but a resilience issue, a health issue, and ultimately an imperative development issue for so many families. The second point I want to make is that we need to be realistic about who will build India's future housing stock. The answer is not the government. The government programs are important, and PMAY has been really transformative. But the vast majority of the housing stock of the next generation will be built by private developers, small contractors, and families who are building incrementally. So if we want resilient housing at scale, the question is not how government build houses. The question is how the government shapes the market to build the houses. In my view, three things matter. First, rules, whether it is core area versus periphery area, whether it is last mile connectivity, resilience and energy efficiency, if they're not embedded in building regulations, if building regulations are not, and zoning strategies and urban planning is not strictly implemented, they will always remain optional and they remain an afterthought. So we need to make sure that we reinforce the importance of rules and regulation and compliance with them. Second is financing. What gets financed gets built. And housing finance institutions have really enormous influence over what kind of housing the market produces. So we need to make sure that we work with the finance institutions and empower them and give them the right incentives and right support structures to do the right thing. And that brings me to my third point, is incentives. We should make the resilience choice the easy choice and the profitable choice. If developers make more money building resilient housing, then we will need not to convince them. The market will do it on its own. And that's exactly what we have been trying to demonstrate through our partnership with counterparts in India. In Tamil Nadu, and I see colleagues from Tamil Nadu on the panel, the most important achievement was not the housing themselves in our engagement. It was actually changing the rules of the game. Climate resilience and energy efficiency provisions were incorporated into the state regulations, and they're influencing development far beyond the life of the project. At the same time, the Tamil Nadu Shelter Fund demonstrated that affordable housing, private capital, and green standards can really coexist. In fact, they can reinforce each other. We have another engagement with Andhra Pradesh and Amravati, where we're taking the next steps. The recently completed a green, resilient, affordable housing plan starts from a simple premise. Resilience is not an afterthought. It is built into the DNA of the urban growth and the regulation and the system from day one. The plan combines evidence on housing demand, private sector participation, innovative financing, and resilient design standards into a single framework for action. It recognizes a reality we sometimes forget. Government resources alone will never be enough. We need to crowd in private investments if we are serious about delivering the housing stock at scale. India, I guess, need more than 100 million houses. So you need to make sure that you influence the government to implement the right policies. Let me just summarize my three key messages. The opportunity is enormous, but it's time-bound. More than half of India's future housing stock is yet to be built. Every year we delay it, more of the future becomes fixed in concrete, and retrofitting becomes much more expensive. Second, the challenge is no longer technical. We know how to build resilient housing. The technology exists, the material exists, the knowledge exists in India. The challenge is institutional. Can we align regulations, finance, incentives, and the delivery systems behind that goal? And third, a resilient housing will be one of the highest return investment India can make. So the next generation of homes will be built regardless. The only question is whether we build them right the first time or leave it for future generations to pay the price for getting it wrong. And that's why I think an NIUA, platforms like this that share experience and demonstrate innovative ways of doing things is really promising and the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdulji. You rightly reiterated the point what Bijalji said, that housing is actually the first tier of resilience, and urban resilience can be there only if there is housing, and for the most vulnerable particularly, it is not just the shelter issue, it is more of a economic issue, it is also occupation issue. And you also very rightly said that more than half of housing that India requires for next 25 years is yet to be built, and we have this huge opportunity. Challenge is there, but also the huge opportunity that if we take the right kind of policies, right kind of incentives, we can build in the resilience at this juncture. And I'm happy to share, in fact, that I have to tell that learning from our experiences of PMAY Urban, if you see the document of PMAY 2.0, the PMAY 2.0 puts does not put pressure on number of houses to be built, rather it puts pressure on reforms that are needed to promote the private investment in housing, particularly affordable housing. And in this context, MOHUA and NITI Aayog had a joint working group which gave its report in December 25, which is in public domain. It's worth seeing. Actually, what you said, I am so happy to hear that many of the thoughts and points raised in the report are echoed here in what you said. So let me take one part of that. Housing can be there only if there is a finance available from both sides. For finance for owned housing, those who want to have to take loan, because home loan, just as government cannot build all the houses, any individual cannot have the savings from the self, family or friends to fund for housing. So home loan and home finance, home credit is something which is integral to growth of any housing market. Here and further, the same is true for developer or someone who is developing the rental house. So our next two speakers, first I will take from NHB. Vishalji, my question from you would be that considering that home loan is such an important issue, what can banks and housing finance companies do, and what is the policy of NHB, Department of Financial Services, to ensure that home loan is available to those who need it most, people working in informal housing, informal sectors, those who are not having salary slip nor the maybe income tax assessment.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I think it's very clear by now that the rising housing costs, limited access to formal credit, informal employment, and climate-related disasters, including inadequate infrastructure, often push the low-income households into economic vulnerability. Further, the poor quality housing increases maintenance costs, energy expenses, and disaster losses, further weakening the household resilience. Therefore, affordable, climate-resistant, and technologically advanced housing must be supported by accessible, sustainable financing mechanism. Globally, it has been seen that the cyclical behavior of housing prices has been linked with the economic growth, credit availability, and the monetary policies, with evidence showing that housing market booms and busts often amplify wider macro financial vulnerabilities. Similarly, in India, the housing sector has acquired increasing economic and social significance. As we all know, it's the second largest employer of the unskilled labor force, and also its contribution to the GDP has crossed 11% as per the figures, and the multiplier effect that it has on the allied industries, more than 250 industries. Now, when it comes to finance, we at NHB have always considered that we've tried to use finance as a lever to ensure that there is targeted financing, particularly to the vulnerable communities for housing. As most of you know, the housing finance market for individual housing loans is dominated by the banks, both public sector and the private sector banks, which have a share of around 80% of the market share. And then you have specialized housing finance institutions known as housing finance companies, which have around 20% of the market share. And this particular percentage has been more or less the same in the last 2 to 3 years. And the growth in the housing, if we have see the figures for 25-26, has been around 8.5% for outstanding. And the individual housing loans outstanding as on date is around 40 lakh crores in the country. The disbursements by all these set of institutions which has happened during the last year has been around 9 lakh crores, which again, it's the public sector banks which have around 47%, the private sector banks have 31%, and the housing finance companies have 22%. But if you actually see the lending by these set of institutions for the informal segment, for the economically weaker sections and the LIG segment, you'll find it's the housing finance companies which have a portfolio of around 24% of their total lending towards this particular segment. And why is that possible? Because the housing finance companies have come out with a different set of appraisal standards, a different set of underwriting standards. There have been different affordable housing institutions. There are certain HFCs which are business model is centered only around this affordable housing segment. As Madam had told about Mahila thing, so in fact, the Seva also had a Seva housing finance company which was being considered only for the affordable housing segment, and that too with gender for women ownership housing. So these housing finance companies have actually demonstrated that it is viable to lend to these particular set of institutions, and that is why you have the private sector banks also now trying to enter that particular market, particularly the small finance banks. I think in future, the small finance banks are going to have a major share of the lending towards individual housing for the EWS and LIG. Second thing is the government programs, whether it's the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, if we have one vertical is known as the interest subsidy scheme, of which the National Housing Bank is the central nodal agency. And I'm very happy to share that only last week, sir, we've crossed beneficiaries 1 lakh. And there also you'll find that, around 60% of these subsidy is being passed on by the housing finance companies, and not so much by the other set of institutions. So that is being demonstrated by the housing finance companies that we would be in a position to lend to this particular segment. Second thing is the program which has been done by the Department of Financial Services for the EWS and LIG segment, which is basically borrowers' annual income is less than 9 lakh. The carpet area should be less than 60 square meters. There also you'll have that it's a good start, but not a very significant part of the individual housing loan portfolio. As on March 2026, the outstanding under this particular scheme was only around 6%. So there is a huge potential for it. Thirdly, I would like to say that NHB, through the refinance window, we have been trying to do targeted lending. And targeted lending is particularly for rural housing, for loans below 10 lakhs, for loans which are being given in aspirational districts, for loans which are given for green housing, and for loans given for the EWS and LIG segment. We have certain concessions, including for women ownership. So this is the type of targeted lending that we're trying to do, and every year we have earmarked a particular amount that we would be lending towards them. And JS also happens to be on the board of the National Housing Bank, so he's been guiding us, and thank you for all your inputs to these particular schemes. One more thing I would like to mention, sir, that as you rightly very mentioned that, it's not only, usually the places where these houses for these informal segments are, they have poor connectivity, or they would have poor infrastructure. So I think that's where the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, which has been operational since the last 2 years, and which is basically meant for creation of infrastructure, water supply, sewerage, connectivity, or composite area development in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So I think in the coming years, that would actually improve the infrastructure around these houses, informal segment. So there, I think we are on the right track, And as far as the housing market is concerned, so we have a mortgage institution, we have the NCGTC, the guarantee product also. So all these are the safeguards which are being provided to the lending institutions also to increase their exposure to this particular segment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Goyalji. In fact, maybe since I'll try to come in second round to ask about how policies and regulations can help in increasing our reach to such population which needs the home loans most. But let's take this financing angle from another point of view, from construction of housing and rental housing. How I'll like to invite Krishna Chaitanya for sharing his experience and understanding that how the PPP models, viability gap support and blended finance mechanisms play or they can play to ensure financial feasibility of affordable and climate resilient housing, maybe on both ownership and rental basis, because particularly I would like your views for rental one for a simple reason. Whatever we talk about home ownership, a significant population of our cities is mobile, and that mobile population is going to increase only, it will not reduce. So we have to think from both perspectives. Krishna, please.
Yep, thank you, sir. And I would start by congratulating NIUA on completing 50 glorious years. I mean, this is in terms of all the resilience, be it climate resilience or any other resilience, they will all be academic models unless and until there is a financial feasibility and it can be replicated at scale. And to replicate it at scale, we need an institutional framework. It is not that we have not done that or we have not been there. If you really look at the last couple of decades, there have been REITs on commercial real estate where this is just a rental model, and it has gone through the whole institutional funding framework, and it has been listed as a REIT, and there is a retail funding there. And since the first REIT had happened, we have seen an exponential growth in the funding in the funding of the commercial real estate. What we are trying to do as TNSF is to bring in the models, the institutional framework and the models. And that is something that I can see that the Urban Challenge Fund has also been doing, where it wants to crowd in more of the private sector players. Because financial feasibility in our view is primarily dependent on two major actors. One is your private sector developers, because these are the developers who can bring operational capability, who can bring construction management, and more importantly, the execution capability at scale and replicably across the wider geographical footprint. The second one is your institutional financing, and wherein you have all your impact funds, your sovereign funds, your private equity funds, and all these other funds who can bring in longer term and lower cost capital, and both of them coexist. Once somebody cites an institutional investor, the bigger private developers who can bring in bigger scale start coming in. And UCF and at some level our fund also wants to do exactly the same thing. To understand how we do that by a multitude of mechanisms. Like sir had mentioned, we don't do much of viability gap funding. We don't do that at all. We do largely by PPP structuring, where we structure the project in such a manner, and as was mentioned by the other panelists, where we have mandatory ESG, mandatory green, and mandatory resilience, climate resilience built into the project design and execution. We ensure that there is a multinational capital which is coming in. To that extent, and what has this done? This has brought in the Tata Group as a partner in one of our project, and they are building it at scale. In the first phase itself is 14,000 beds of women's rental housing, industrial housing at their site, and the phase 2 is another 20,000 beds. Even just counting the 14,000 which is already completed, we have to date over the last few years completed or under construction, advanced stage of construction, more than 40,000 beds of women's rental housing. And not only that, even on the for sale mechanism, to date we have catalyzed more than 5,000 units. And the recent investment, which will be completed by September of this year, is for women who are working at in the leather factories at the real lowest level. The flats are priced at 11 lakhs to 21 lakhs. And how do we do that? We do that by financial structuring, where we structure the payment to the developer. I mean, we don't go to the demand side. NHB and the banks that it would partner with would do that. We do the demand side, the supply side financing, where we are telling the developer that you go ahead and build this. Yes, they need to be climate resilient, they need to be affordable, and they need to meet the demands of all these workers. And for that, we give support in terms of structuring, where we say that the base rate is lower and the rest comes in as a profit share. We have done the same thing in one of our other platforms, where we have underwritten the occupancy by 65, 75, and 85% in the first 3 years. And at this occupancy, we have said that we will be making about a 6% return. And we said that when there is a profit which comes, we will make a much higher return, another 6%. What has happened, once we build those projects, the projects have achieved an occupancy of 95% within the first 6 months. So we are already at our profit share, right in the first 2 quarters. So all we are doing is we are establishing models where we can attract the 2 major actors, the developers, the credible developers, as well as the investors, the institutional investors. So, I mean, happy to give some more examples, but maybe in the interest of time, I'll take that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaitanya. So if you see, we discussed the social aspect of resilience. We discussed how housing is the core and first tier of resilience, and to secure housing, why institutional finance from developer side, from supply side, and also the home loan credit is important, and what can be done, what is being done. But let's go back to the old issue. From technical side, what can be the technology? What is the carbon footprint? How, what Sethji mentioned, that let's be vocal for local, have local materials, reinvent our traditional design and traditional practices. So let's come back to that aspect again, and I would like to invite CN Jhaji for 2 things, because BMTPC is very well involved in promoting scalable and cost-effective environment-friendly construction technologies. There have been lighthouse projects which are big buildings, close to 1,000 houses in single project. There are multiple demonstration housing projects demonstrating different construction technologies, and BMTPC has been involved in promotion of both building materials and building construction practices as part of PMAY, and otherwise also sharing the knowledge with other stakeholders. So, Jhaji, I would like to ask you the experience of BMTPC and government in how the technologies, environmentally sustainable technologies that have been adopted in India, and what were the initial challenges, how they were overcome. so that at least I will not talk about fast construction technologies. Let's not discuss that. Let's talk about resource efficient and resilient construction technologies and materials. So how discussion, they become the center of discussion, how such practices and technologies can become the mainstream, what steps are being taken and what should be our approach.
Thank you, sir. Congratulations to NIUA for completing 50 years of its operation. And sir, I will start from, I will focus on materials and technology part only. And I will start from what Dr. Seth has said, that passive design, like his valuable opinion that passive design can bring a lot of benefits. But here I would highlight the role of the material, which he must be aware of, that there are materials apart from like all the passive design like ventilators, window, wall opening size, and shading of building. So there are few materials like autoclaved aerated concrete block, EPS core based technology, like which is having in its core like expanded polystyrene sheet, which is highly insulating in nature with both side concrete layer, and lightweight panels. So these three can help individual in a house, even like in hot summer days of Delhi, without AC, like requirement of AC is completely eliminated to a large extent. Even the modest like cavity wall, which is now out of fashion, so it can like not up to this scale, but to a large extent, it can bring insulation to the housing units, but this is out of fashion. So role of materials and technology is very, this one, important. And if we talk of like materials and technology, so BMTPC has been like promoting these materials and technologies, but a major initiative has been taken in this direction through Global Housing Technology Challenge, wherein like 6 broad categories of technologies comprising of total 54 specific technologies have been identified. And those broad categories of technologies, like which is precast concrete construction, one category is totally volumetric in nature. Sir, I will slightly go on this new technologies only because for mass housing problem and the requirement of housing in a time to come, so speed is going to be a very important parameter. So we can talk of like local materials and all, and we would try to integrate these things, but unless mechanization and prefabrication is there, so we cannot meet the requirement of like future requirements, the way like we are urbanizing and but this is limited to mass housing. Individual housing we can bring like local materials and all, but mass housing without mechanization we cannot go. So 6 broad categories of technology. So modular construction, wherein a complete module is like fabricated in a yard, and this is like brought to the building site and put one adjacent to other and put like one over the other. So this is one precast technology which is in module form. Then the which is in practice in our country, like two-dimensional system of precast, wherein wall panel, then slab panel are brought to the site, brought to the building, and they are assembled in situ, kind of. And others are like steel-based system. Steel is also very important from the point of view of very high salvage value of the steel, and even the demolition of a steel structure is quite easy, and it can bring you up to 30% of the like present value of the this one construction. And if we go lightweight panels along with this, so lightweight panels bring additional benefit in terms of bringing energy efficiency and this quite lower load on the foundation and the structure also. So two categories where stay in place formwork system and this one lightweight this sandwich panel system. And one technology which is like monolithic shear wall construction technology, which has penetrated very fast and like it is being largely adopted by government departments also and this private developers also. So this technology is a modular construction system using large formwork and which is in the form of aluminum formwork, and another which has been tried in our lighthouse project, which is this tunnel formwork. Tunnel formwork is far, in terms of speed, it is like far superior. Like it, in our lighthouse projects, we have achieved a cycle of less than 2 days per unit construction time. So this is like kindly unheard of for such a large scale project of 1144, this lighthouse project at Rajkot. So we have achieved this cycle, which is like quite impressive. So for bringing speed and so we need to go for the mechanized kind of system. Then about the advantages like which we have advantage or specialities which we have achieved in our lighthouse projects. So in Ranchi, this G+8 story buildings were constructed using this modular formwork, and in that it is concrete based this module. In that the concrete which used the cement was slag based cement, having slag content of 61 to 65% in that cement. So we can imagine such a low carbon concrete in this, having this one. And generally precast players never use such a high proportion of slag or fly ash because they want the strength to be developed very fast. What in Ranchi the contracting agency did that it went for this steam curing to get high early strength, and then they installed the all the components early. But this type of replacement of OPC to the extent of 65%, it is also unheard of for the this one production of precast components. Then Rajkot, like apart from achieving that this one cycle, very this one impressive cycle of construction. So the concrete mixed design was done by NCCBM Ahmedabad, which used only 350 kg of OPC, ordinary Portland cement, and achieved a strength of 40 Newton per mm square of the concrete strength, and such a high early strength that about 12 Newton per mm square after 12 hours. And it is also kind of unheard of thing. After 18 hours of time, the slab formwork has been removed, which is like not seen otherwise like other places. So many feats, remarkable feats have been achieved. I don't say that issues were not there. Issues also came, but many new things have also been achieved in terms of like this one uses of this slag or the fly ash, even like this one in lighthouse project Lucknow. So we used this stay in place formwork. Stay in place formwork is a system where like unlike this one concrete casting, we put the formwork in the bottom or in the side, but here the formwork stays with the system. And the beauty is like the formwork which stays with the system is pre-painted, pre-finished your wall. You don't require any plastering, you don't require any painting over that. And you put the concrete. Another beauty, concrete doesn't require curing because it is encased, and lightweight concrete has been used with this 400 to 500 kg of fly ash in that. So another like utilization of industrial waste and bringing this carbon to the bare minimum kind of construction. But with all, like I will say that even today, like our central agency CPWD is also doing a lot of construction using this new technology, like IIT Jammu project or IIT Mandi. They have used steel-based construction. Many NITs, NIT Goa, and this other like some other NITs, they have constructed using precast. Many this residential building, they are doing this monolithic concrete construction, and even NBCC also. But in term, even under this PMAY, about 10 lakhs houses have been constructed using new technologies. All these technologies are quality and other issues, they need to be taken care of even in the precast. Which ecosystem, like we should further upgrade that, like those quality issues, though like chances of improvement of degradation of quality in precast construction or this large formwork system is much lower than the conventional construction. Chances are much lower, but still, like, we cannot do away with the all quality aspects. We need to inculcate this quality thing. But one practical problem, like with this one, like monolithic shear wall construction, is having that concrete having its like its inherent property,
Heating
physical
qualities.
property is like it is thermally conductive, more thermally conductive than the brick masonry. Its thermal conductivity is 1.6 watt per meter Kelvin as compared to brick masonry of like 0.78, means just double. So, lot of construction using this monolithic shear wall construction is adding to heat island effect in the cities. And we need to check this, and there are methods. In large formwork system, we have gone one step ahead. It is modular construction, bringing speed, bringing like a high lateral, this one resistance against earthquake or the wind forces. But we are lacking on the part of this, that thermally it is not much comfortable.
Thank you, Jahaji. I think
Huh.
we'll come back. But
And-
you have raised a very important point. Lot of work is being done for environmentally sustainable construction technologies and materials. And while you are able to solve the sustainability part, low carbon emission, there is another resilience part that problem gets reintroduced, that is heat island in some of the cases. But you rightly said, yes, lot of steps are being taken. We would love to hear the technical part, but unfortunately we are also running out of time. So maybe if time permits, we'll come back. But here is something where you ended, that heat island and thermal comfort is something important, and that is why I like to invite Sanjay Sethji once again, because we are discussing the framework part. How can green building frameworks, like Griha is one of them, and Econivas Sanhita, these can make sustainable construction practices as new normal, and the mainstream construction technologies, how it can be done through frameworks and incentive mechanisms.
Thank you. I think what is important to note is that when we talk of sustainability and resilience, and if we do not talk about materials, I think that's the missing link, and we are not doing justice at all. And especially when you're talking of constructions, and you know that constructions are largely using cement and steel, and these are always a lot of embodied carbon and emissions are associated with. These are the hard to abate sectors, as they say. So how do we make, and even Jaji also talked about making constructions lean and mean so that the embodied carbon goes down. So that's very important. Eco-Niwas Samhita is a policy instrument which the government has brought out for directing the residential housing segment to become more sustainable. And Griha, Griha is a rating system which helps us to understand, compare it against benchmarks. So against the benchmarks of policy instruments, where do we stand in terms of sustainability? So it's essentially, if you look at it, the policy framework becomes the push, and the pull is provided by the framework such as Griha. Because you need push and pull to work together. Otherwise, you know, if there is only push, then probably we'll not end up anywhere. So that's number one. Number two, the point is that if you look at India's urban housing, I'll give you some numbers, that if you look at India's housing, the baseline of embodied carbon intensity, it's in the range of about 370 to 415 kilograms of CO2 emissions per meter squared of the built up area. And cement and steel again are the main culprits or drive this surge. So it's very important that how do we go about bring this down, and when we are looking at low carbon pathways for the future constructions that are going to happen. Now in that, there is a lot of work which is being done also by our colleagues at BMTPC, as he rightly said. But the important thing is that if we want to talk about sustainable green housing or all of that, we have to put information out in the open source for building practitioners to understand where do we source material which are locally available, at what cost, what would be the carbon footprint, what would it be the whether, how green are these, whether, you know, when we are, otherwise it will end up in greenwashing and all that. So putting credible information out in the open source is very, very important, and that is what we at TERI and GRIA both do. We test the thermal properties of building materials and put out such information. We have a live portal where information is put out in the open source so that people can benefit from it. Where do they source materials from? In the past, when I was still with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we remember that we had created a portal with the, under the, you know, with our colleagues, our partners in GIZ, a Building Materials Directory of India. Unfortunately, I do not know whether that portal is still live or not, but a similar exercise is being done at TERI, and we have this portal which puts in a lot of information out in the open source. And then, of course, the GRIA's catalog. We have a GRIA's catalog where information, again, of such materials and their performance is put out in the open source for people to benefit. So affordability, sustainability, and then I think life cycle cost analysis, all of these life cycle costing, all of these become very, very important strategies to make sure that you are able to optimize. And resource optimization is, I think, key. It's very important that if you really are wanting to look at sustainability and resilience to be taken on a longer, on a trajectory which we are looking at, I think resource optimization becomes the key word. So since we are short on time, I would also like to give the other speakers an opportunity, but largely I have covered up some of the aspects in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Sethji. So, yes, we are running out of time, and we had promised to vacate the room by 4:30. But before I take any questions from audience, let me ask Devarpita. Now NIUA is involved, and rightly so in 50th year. It is involved on a Center for Public Housing and Habitat. Where do you see that what should be our urgent policy and interventional policy actions and thrust that we should all collectively be taking? Government, NGOs, financing institutions, and institutions like BMTPC, TERI, who are working for sustainable practices and building construction technologies. What should be our common factors we should all take as kind of moral pledge for policy and actions? Your thoughts, please.
Thank you, sir. And thank you so much for all your kind wishes on NIUA's 50 years. Housing, when a project is conceived, right? Project, whether it is an individual who is building his own 2-room, 3-room house, or a developer who is building a mass housing projects of maybe 2,000 to 5,000 units. What are the 4 key things that we need to keep in mind? 1, affordability. 2, feasibility for whosoever is building the house. Now, if it's an individual who is building the house, feasibility and affordability clubs together. But if it's a developer, whether it's a public agency, a state housing board, or whether it's a private developer, feasibility is key. Without that, your project will not see the day of light or will stop in between. Third, most important is inclusivity. It should be inclusive, right? And 4th, and now a must-have, is resilience and sustainability. And this is one such panel where we had representation on each of these dimensions. Affordability, which NHB and Vishal sir talked about, right? Feasibility with Krishna ji from the developer aspect so beautifully, explained. Third, inclusivity, which Bijal ma'am has been working on, has dedicated her career and life to. And fourth, the resilient and sustainability, which Sanjay Seth sir and C.N. Jha sir talked about, right? It is all of them which have to come together. And over the last 10 years, under the Housing for All mission, that is what I think the mission has been trying to achieve, Kuldeep sir, right? If we see the pace at which PMAY has built, it's roughly 10 lakh houses per year, right? It's a huge, huge pace of construction and development. So the question is not whether we can build, right? The question is that what are we building? And the government of India and all these nodal agencies have already given the policy space enough, rather material, ideas, even evidence that where should the policies, really, what kind of houses need to be built, what are the supportive policies, what should be, for example, the Model Tenancy Act lays out even, a draft guideline for tenancy acts for each state. But the implementation is what the state governments need to now pick up, and big time, right? I think that is where, sir, the next phase of, in terms of whether it's evidence creation in understanding what are the implementation challenges. How long does an approval still take, 2.5 to 3 years for a, 5,000 unit housing unit project? How long does a DPR for a BLC type, neighborhood planned development take? Because the moment is you drop a plan on paper in terms of finances with a timeline of 18 months. But there's a cost of capital, and these are affordable housing projects where even 1 paisa matters. It's not a luxury housing project which is a huge profit margin and people with deep pockets who are buying who can absorb that extra cost of capital for any delay, right? So what are the state governments, I think that's where we should come in, sir, NIUA, that what are the state governments doing, how can they be helped in really, now implementing this, first of all, this, rather national level policies, translating them into feasible state level policies and their implementation. Because each state has a different context, understanding that context and then helping them execute. And the final execution will be by the ULBs, who have their own set of, problems to deal with, where capacity is a huge, huge issue. So I think that's where we should, so the next phase of, rather policy we should be looking.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we may be just in time. So before summing up, I think any question if audience want to raise to any of our panelists. Okay. So let's limit to 2. First, yeah. So first person gets the first. No, I think, no, please, no, excuse me. Please take the mic. He is asking the question. And after that, gentleman on that chair. Yeah. You keep speaking. You are audible. Don't worry.
Heat island effect. This urban heat island effect means average temperature in a city like Mumbai is about 5 degrees more than the surroundings. And it appears that this is because of the high-rise towers which have a lot of steel in it. And steel being a very good conductor of heat, the buildings are getting heated up. I was told London doesn't heat up that much because in London, a lot of old construction is there and maybe the high rises are not there that much. So is there any alternative to steel which will allow for high rises, or otherwise how green buildings are possible even with use of steel?
Would like to take or? So the issue is that, as you rightly said, that when we look at heavy concrete structures or dark surfaces and all of that, they absorb a lot of heat during the daytime, and then when the temperatures go down using the principles of thermal conductivity, there is a because of the potential difference, they dissipate a lot of heat, and that is where the heat stresses are felt more frequently, and the urban heat island effects are seen. Now the point is that we need to look at how we can improve these through bringing down the urban microclimates. How can you work on that? And there are these concepts of both the urban living labs as well as what we call as the smart surfaces, where we can look at light colored pavements so that a lot of the sunlight is reflected back into the atmosphere so that the heat is absorbed less, vegetation covers, water bodies, all of that. So it has to be done in a scientific manner. We've done one such project recently, and we've just launched it in Bhopal, in the city of Bhopal, where we took down data of the city and saw where the heat stresses were, and then provided them real-time, using their real-time data, we provided them solutions where we need to put vegetative covers, where do we need to put cool roofs, where do we need to put water bodies, all of that. But no knee-jerk action. You should not do it like that. So if we address it like this, then we will be able to, and you cannot wish away concrete and steel and all of that from the constructions, especially when you're going high-rise. Safety is a very important element, and I think that will continue to remain the way we construct. Thank you.
Thank you, Sethji. In fact, just to supplement what you said in the last, I take it from there. We cannot have a knee-jerk reaction. Yes, we are having problems because we are alive. So you are having so much density because of steel and concrete only. So you cannot wish them away, but yes, there are a lot of dead spaces in our urban areas which should be used innovatively and promote environmental safeguards. Like, can we have more trees? Can we have shade trees around our footpath? And do we need so many vehicles? Or we are talking about mobility? We should be talking about mobility, keeping the person at the center rather than thinking about the car that it moves. We can think about cool roof campaign. We can think about water bodies. There are a lot of things that can happen even while maintaining your high-rise buildings, which are highly made up of concrete and steel. There also, as C.N. Jhaji mentioned, in wall technologies, there are new materials and new construction practices that can be taken, involving both passive design elements as well as the wall materials, which can actually reduce the heat island effect. So heat island effect is something we are creating not only because of the buildings, but because of our uses practice also. So that needs to be controlled. The gentleman there, yeah, please.
So, hello everyone. My question is that even though we understand that some of the materials are much better than, let's say, a normal a 9-inch brick that we were using, and in spite of that, we also have materials which are much worse, as Mr. Jha mentioned, which is, the problem is not concrete. Most of our houses are built with concrete on the floor, on the slabs. Our problem is we are also building houses with concrete in the walls, which is something I don't understand. And we have built lakhs and lakhs of these houses under PMAY, which are now using concrete as a wall material, which is much worse than what we were actually building before. So the question is, I suggest, it's a suggestion or a question, that Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the next iteration, can put a simple clause that the walls should have a basic thermal property. It cannot go below it. And even though we have Econivas Samhita, which came in 2018, and the new version has already come in 2024, it has still not been adopted, neither for the private sector, not for the for Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. So it's a very simple connection, and the question really is that why are we even talking about a shear wall technology which performs so much worse than a normal wall? and we're building continuously with it, why are we even allowing such a construction to take place?
Just let
And
me.
I have all the data, I've done all the studies of how they perform.
What you said, I agree partially, but it's a your suggestion or question cannot be completed in a minute or two. It's actually a beginning of a discussion. But I appreciate what you said, and I agree that we should be specifying the wall properties rather than the materials. That is part one. Two, more and more such documents and standards need to be adopted and made part of our policy doctrine along with the frameworks of measurement. Agree. So I'm trying not to answer your question because that's the beginning of new discussion that we can have some time later. It's already 4:28. Thank you.
Looking forward to it, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So I think then let's try to sum up. It was a very good discussion, and as Devarpita already said that the panel well represented, we have tried to touch upon the aspects of urban resilience. And if I have to sum up in 2 lines, I would say the top line remains that housing is the first tier of resilience for all the citizens. And if we have to talk about urban resilience, we have to think about the PD, but certainly resource efficient and green sustainable, because more than half of the buildings built up environment that we need is yet to be built. So we all of us remain cognizant of these facts, and we should be taking up policies, taking up our actions, keeping these basic lines in our mind. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for summing up the conversation and driving the conversation as well. And thank you to all the panelists for their invaluable perspectives provided here today. I request Dr. Deparpita Roy to kindly felicitate the speakers. I request all the speakers to kindly join in the front of the stage for a group photograph, and then we may break for tea after this. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
tea is served right outside the hall. Everyone kindly join us for the tea break. Thank you everyone.
Record.